In the last few decades, Europe has become a very diverse continent, and this diversity is obvious as far as religion is concerned. Undoubtedly, the United Kingdom is one of the most diverse societies in the whole of Europe, and the aim of my presentation is to analyze the response of different member states of the European Union to religious diversity, which is obviously the theme of this conference, and with a special emphasis on the United Kingdom. I shall therefore focus on the different models of church and state relations in Europe, and I will particularly refer to the challenges ahead of us here in the United Kingdom. My presentation is meant to be just an introductory session, an overview, and it will deal with areas which are going to be covered by other speakers, particularly Lord Eben, Reverend Tim Stevens, and Professor Spade. Then, as I was, This presentation is therefore going to focus mainly on the legal side. I know we have extremely distinguished commentators that are going to be touching upon this area from different angles, but I'm an academic lawyer. I'm based at the moment at the University of Manchester, and I'm a constitutional lawyer with a special interest in law and religion. And in order to understand religious diversity and how we respond to these religious diversities here in the United Kingdom and in the rest of Europe, I think the legal element becomes absolutely vital, and it's important to realize how we respond to this reality in different ways all across Europe. European commentators, including British scholars, and I cite Professor Norman Doe from Cardiff University there, who's carried out lots of research on this area, distinguish between three models on religion and state relations in Europe. Then in the first part of my presentation, I'm going to refer to some of the countries that fit into these wider categories. And immediately after, once I look at the three different models, I'm going to approach the British response, or I should probably say the British responses, because we have different ways to deal with these matters in England, Wales, Scotland, and so on. Then the three different categories that are considered, that are regarded as church-state models in Europe, even though, as you can tell, the terminology is not necessarily accurate and is not sufficiently respectful for the religious plurality that we have, fortunately, now in Europe, but unfortunately, still commentators tend to, or keep referring to church-state rather than, I would say, public authorities and religious bodies. Is a far more accurate terminology. The three different models would be the state-church system, separatist system, and hybrid or cooperationist system, because they have features of the two other categories. When it comes to the state-church system, there is a close constitutional link between the state and that particular religion, or several religions in that country. The United Kingdom is a good example of that, when we have the Church of England here in the English nation, but we also have the Church of Scotland. That's the model that we have in the northern nation of the United Kingdom, the national church system as recognized by the Church of Scotland Act 1921. We have other ways to recognize the importance of that particular faith, as it happens in Greece, with this idea of a prevailing religion. The Orthodox faith is regarded as the official faith of the state on numerical grounds. Mainly is the faith that is professed by the majority of citizens in the Greek state. We have the established church in England. There are still some commentators that refer to this model as a state-church system. I humbly disagree with this. The state-church system obviously implies an idea that the church is a branch of the state, and there will be other speakers who will refer to this. This was the theme of my PhD, the topic of my research when I first moved to the United Kingdom. And I think decisions such as Aston-Kant law clearly suggest otherwise. The Church of State is certainly not a branch of the British state. But obviously, all this is debatable, and I'll be more than happy to discuss it with you later on today. A clearer example of what a state church means here in the European continent would be the Church of Denmark model, which is basically a church regulated directly by the state. Please forgive me for being over-simplistic perhaps here. I don't claim to be an expert in Danish law, but generally speaking, after discussing this matter with quite a few colleagues in Denmark that deal with this area, the Church of Denmark clearly fits, generally speaking, into this idea of a state church, a branch of the Danish public authorities. In the other end of the spectrum, we would have the separatist model. And in the separatist system, there is this very interesting idea, with which I disagree, that religion should be confined to the private sphere, and public authorities and religious bodies, in principle, at least theoretically, I should say, do not cooperate with each other. In fact, there is a prohibition against state financial support for religion. And in this very interesting category, we have, needless to say, the French model. But we also have, perhaps bewilderingly, I would say, and I was discussing this with my colleague and friend Noel this morning, the Republic of Ireland. Theoretically, the Republic of Ireland is under this category, and I'll look at that in just 1 minute, if I may. But beforehand, focusing on France, obviously, there is this idea that religion is separated from the state. However, having said that, there is some evidence of preferential legal treatment for the Roman Catholic Church. And when it comes to work of related to places of worship built before 1905, the state undertakes major works of repair, and it clearly supports financially the Roman Catholic Church. Also, the French state, and you could claim that this is on humanitarian grounds, it has responsibility, also financial responsibility, for financing chaplains in the armed forces, public hospitals, and prisons. In my humble opinion, this reality clearly challenges the essence of separation as such. And although I wouldn't want to be oversimplistic and claim that the French model is identical to the realities that I'm going to describe later today, personally, I think there is a big question mark about this strict separation that is clearly evolving in the last few decades. Ireland, or the Republic of Ireland, definitely the other model of separation in Europe, because the Irish Constitution is quite clear about it. The state, Article 44 of the Irish Constitution, declares that the state guarantees to endow no religion. The Roman Catholic Church has no special legal position. There's no concordat between the state and the church, and the state has no formal legal powers to make church appointments. The canon law of the Roman Catholic Church is foreign law in the eyes of the Irish state. However, and I was also discussing this with Noel this morning, when it comes to areas such as the education system, the role, the importance, the significance of the Roman Catholic Church is unquestionable, and religion becomes a very important element of the schooling system in the Republic of Ireland. Once again, questioning or challenging clearly this theoretical framework that I am sharing with you today. In between, we have the hybrid category. And the hybrid category, I would say, is an interesting way to respond, I beg your pardon, to this diversity, to these changes that have taken place, in my view, fortunately, in the European continent. It's a way to try to reconcile tradition with new developments. And the system is applicable to countries which were traditionally linked with one particular faith, but that have obviously witnessed a significant growth of other denominations within their borders, And they have had to respond to that increasingly new religious diversity. And I'm thinking, obviously, of my home country, Spain, and I'm going to use it as an example, if I may, in the next few minutes. In these systems, it's hybrid because there is, strictly speaking, constitutional separation from a theoretical point of view between public authorities and religious bodies. The Spanish Constitution clearly declares that there's no official faith. Exactly the same is applicable to Italy and so on. However, the difference with the French model lies in this idea of cooperation. The Spanish Constitution, the Italian Constitution, and all these other countries I'm referring to value the significance of religion in our society and claim that the state, the public authorities, should cooperate with religious bodies. And in order to implement, to put forward that cooperation, agreements will be signed with the different religious bodies. In the Spanish case, those religious bodies are, needless to say, to start with, the Holy See, but this is an international agreement signed with the Vatican in 1979, and we have, and can you imagine, we signed the Spanish Constitution in 1978. It took us quite a while to sign the agreements with the other minority denominations. And that agreement was signed, or those three agreements with Protestants, Jews, and Muslims took place in 1992. And it was a recognition of the increasingly religious diversity within the Spanish state. And some commentators oppose it because even at that stage in 1992, these religious minorities represented only approximately 1% of the Spanish population. Obviously, this has changed now significantly. But there is no doubt that there is a major legal difference between those agreements. On the one hand, the agreements with the Holy See are international agreements, and they need the endorsement of both authorities to amend those provisions, whilst the agreements with Protestant, Jewish, and Muslims are domestic pieces of legislation, and they could be modified unilaterally by those authorities. Examples of this cooperation are, for instance, the fact that Catholic religion must necessarily, by law, be offered in every single state school. It is needless to say, because we are in a separate cooperationist country rather than a confessional one, it must be voluntary for both parents and students. Teachers of Catholic religion are appointed by the diocesan bishops, but they are paid by the state. As you probably envisage, there are lots of controversies when it comes to these appointments and the dismissal of these teachers. Other religious denominations, and they are paid by the state. That doesn't happen with the teachers of other denominations. Therefore, whether or not there is legal equality amongst different religious bodies is obviously subject to discussion. And the tax system, and I don't want to dwell too much on this, is another example of how different the Catholic Church is treated from other religious bodies. Whether or not we justify it on sociological and historical grounds, I am more than prepared to discuss that because that's a very interesting topic, but whether tradition justifies that degree of difference is a very debatable matter. My predecessor has referred to, Edward has referred to the census of 2011. The United Kingdom is becoming, or has become, I would say, a pluralistic society. And the 2011 census showed that in England and Wales, 59% of us regarded as Christians. Muslims represented almost 5% of the population, and they were followed in descending order by the Hindu, the Sikhs, the Jewish, and the Buddhist community. It's certainly beyond my... I love teaching, and I would be delighted to be here for quite a few hours, but obviously I have a very limited number, and I'm not teaching you anyway. You're not my undergraduate students. But interestingly, I think I would love to tell you more about the general legal framework. I'm sure that many of you are far more knowledgeable than me about it, but nevertheless, I'm going to refer to some of the most important, the most significant legal developments which have taken place here in the United Kingdom in the last few years. And then I shall refer to the special position of the Church of England and the Church of Scotland. And with that, I will conclude, because obviously the most important part of this session should be the question and answer session. Obviously, the enactment of the Human Rights Act has been an outstanding transformation in British law, and that shouldn't be underestimated. Obviously, there has been a big emphasis on legislation concerning discrimination on the grounds of religion, and I would like to highlight the importance of the Equality Act 2010. But religion is certainly an aspect which is valued by British law, by English law, and also in other jurisdictions within the United Kingdom. And I think education law is clearly an important example of that. And it's still the case, and I hope it will remain, it's still the case that religious education is taught in all state schools, and it must be non-denominational, as we all know, but it must be predominantly Christian, but also taking into account the realities of other religious faith in the school. I think there is an important body of authors who are challenging this explicit mention of Christianity, for instance, in the Education Act 1996, and they would say it's not sufficiently inclusive. I understand this is an interesting area. I would be more than happy to discuss it with you later on if you wish. I became completely besotted with the I'm a Roman Catholic myself, but I became completely besotted with the idea of establishment, and that's why I moved to the United Kingdom 10 years ago. And I did, you may find it bewildering or strange, I apologize for that, but I just thought it was a very, very interesting area from a legal point of view. And then it is still the case that in the United Kingdom, and I have to say that this idea of establishment can be debatable, but it doesn't seem to give rise to any sort of social outcry. We can discuss later on if you wish. I think this idea of benign models of establishment is worth preserving. That's my view after having lived in the United Kingdom for a number of years. And establishment, if anything, I have to admit, and I have to be completely honest, has grown on me. As a continental European, 10 or 12 years ago, I came with this idea that this was completely anachronistic, and it was completely at odds with a state in which there should be plurality, diversity, and this model was debatable. In the meantime, I have become a strong supporter of the model of establishment. I've also become a British citizen and so on, because I just thought, well, this is an absolutely exciting model. However, I'm not saying that it's perfect. Certainly quite a few things of this model of establishment should be revisited. It's not my aim, obviously, to look into each of the aspects of the model of establishment. We are all familiar with the position of the monarch. We are all familiar with the way measures are approved in the Church of England, the appointment of the bishops and other senior figures by the sovereign, the presence of 26 archbishops and bishops in the House of Lords. And I teach this area to undergraduate students in Manchester University, and you will be very interested in learning that it seems to be this presence of bishops in the House of Lords. I don't know if, some research has been carried out, and I'm not sure whether polls have been conducted, but some of my students who confess, who declare themselves as atheists or agnostics, they seem to be very happy with the idea of having bishops in the House of Lords. And they claim, well, it's part of our history, it doesn't do any harm. And as we know, some of the strongest supporters of the presence of bishops in the House of Lords was, to my surprise, when I carried out research for my own PhD, members of religious minorities. I think, for instance, Tariq Mudud has carried out this very interesting study entitled Church Establishment and Religious Minorities, and it seems to be the case, in the view of many religious minorities, that if the alternative to not having a religious voice in parliaments is having no religious voice altogether, we'd better keep the bishops of in the House of Lords. I wouldn't want to see them go, personally, but that's a different matter. But we also have some other features of the Church of England establishment, which I think has a big impact on the ordinary lives of citizens, and I think is beneficial to the lives of those of citizens here in the English nation. And I refer to marriage, I refer to baptism, and the Prison Act, and so on. I don't have enough time to discuss all this in length, even though I would like it, but we can discuss it later, if you like, in the question and answer session. In Scotland, and I'm about to finish my presentation, but in Scotland, we have a different reality. We have a system which we could argue is far more symbolic. Interestingly, the legislation enacted by the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland must not be ratified by the state or by the Scottish public authorities. From that point of view, we could claim that the Church of Scotland has proper legislative independence. The monarch is not the supreme governor of the Church of Scotland. However, the monarch must commit herself to preserving Presbyterianism in Scotland. And that symbolic union, well, union perhaps is not the right term, but that symbolic cooperation between church and state in Scotland is viewed through the figure of the Lord High Commissioner that represents Her Majesty every single year when he or she attends the Church Assembly annual assembly. Some commentators have referred to the model of establishment in Scotland as the way forward for us here in England. I'm always particularly worried about these ideas of what we have in Spain or what we have in Scotland or what we have in France, we should bring it to England. We all have different histories, and then it's quite, I think it's quite dangerous, but nevertheless, just a thought. The truth is that when it comes to the models of establishment that we have in England and Scotland, and this idea of state churches that I referred to earlier on in Greece or Denmark, all these other European states, the truth is that our supranational organizations don't have a say on that. And our supranational organizations, or these models of establishment, have met with the approval of both the European Union and also the Council of Europe. And the European Union, in a declaration attached to the Treaty of Amsterdam in 1997, stated as follows: the European Union respects and does not prejudice the status under national law of churches and religious associations or communities in the member states. The European Union equally respects the status of philosophical and non-confessional organizations. Well, I think this is quite a nuanced and sophisticated statement. This has nothing to do with the European Union, and it's something that we should probably decide in every member state. The idea of subsidiarity is clear. And the Council of Europe, when the European Court of Human Rights has had to deal with these matters, for instance, in Derby versus Sweden in the year 2000, the European Court of Human Rights declared that the Swedish model of establishment, prior to that disestablishment, was compatible with the principle of religious freedom. Very interesting. Then, if I may, I shall conclude with some final reflections. And the first reflection is the idea that I shared with you earlier on. Are these British models of establishment? Because we are dealing with pluralism in this section, diversity in all this very exciting conference. Then, are these British models of establishment a proper response to the religious pluralism of our society? Or are those commentators who claim that it's completely anachronistic, outdated, right? Then that's what I would really love to discuss with you later on today, if you wish. And there are three models, theoretically, of church and state. I beg your pardon, I still keep using this terminology, which is not necessarily, but it's the terminology that we have used traditionally. I think I should have said they are also public authorities and religious bodies. Are these three models of public bodies and religious authorities in Europe really three different models? Is really true? Or Are Professor Doe and Russell Sandberg and Cardiff University when they claim that in reality what we all have now in Europe is different degrees of cooperation. And at the end of the day, as Edward was also saying earlier on, religion has become so important and is such an important part of our society that that cooperation is definitely needed. Thank you very much for having me here today.